Today we are going to be reacting to scary stories.
I was only 9 at the time, and we had just moved to a better location. Our apartment was on the 6th floor, and was the last one on the landing. It was the furthest you could go from the entrance of the building, and was fairly secluded. The staircase was also completely indoors, with 4 apartments to a floor.
He just looks
One day,
different in some.
I came home from school around 2 p.m. My parents weren't due back for at least another 3 hours, and I set about doing my usual homework, watching TV, and emptying out the fridge. It was around the time that I settled down for an episode of Babylon 5 that I heard the front doorbell ring.
What did I tell you? He looks young.
This was very odd, as my parents both had their keys, and no one else usually visited around this time of day. I went over to the front door and asked, "Who is it?" I heard a man answer back, "Hello there. I am from the electrical company. We are doing a routine check on the electrical meters. May I come in and inspect yours? It will only take a minute." I looked through the peephole and saw a young man, probably nearing his 30s, very clean, neatly dressed, with his hair combed to the side. He held a clipboard in his hand with some papers attached. I was about to twist open the lock when something caught my eye. Because of the fisheye view I had on the landing, I could also see a little extra to the sides, on my left and the man's right. I saw a light bouncing from what looked like a sharp metal object. It took me a second, but I clearly saw what it was. It was the cutting edge of an axe. Someone was standing right next to the door, attempting to hide from view, holding an axe in their hands. At this point, my memory gets blurry. I remember stepping away from the door and creeping into my room, which was the furthest in the hallway. I closed my door and didn't come back out until my parents got back. The bell kept ringing for a few more minutes, and then it finally fell silent. I never told anyone about it, until now.
You should have.
So these were my stories, and I think there's always something important to learn from encounters like this.
Oh. Yeah.
It's a line of opera-themed soaps.
Honey, you should Squarespace that.
Squarespace
Got an idea? Squarespace it.
I used to work at one company for about a year before I entered the company I'm working at currently. Time I was living alone with my wife. Although we both like kids, we weren't ready yet. Anyway, it was one night and I was heading home being drunk as usual after finishing a get-together. Passing through the front door of the apartment, I pressed the button to get on the elevator, and the elevator that was stopped on the 3rd basement level began to climb slowly. Finally, the elevator arrived on the 1st floor.
Being a smart Alex here.
And I felt cold as soon as I walked inside. It was almost 12 o'clock and my body was getting hot by the effects of alcohol, but I could definitely feel chilly inside the elevator. Well, I guess it's because the elevator stayed deep underground for a while, I thought, and then pressed the 16th floor button where I live. The elevator started moving slowly. However, it suddenly stopped on the 5th floor. Normally, the people in my apartment didn't take the elevator very often at the time. So I was standing in the middle of the elevator. As soon as the door opened, I stepped aside. But no one was standing there. I thought someone who was impatient must have pressed the button and then just went up to the emergency exit stairs.
Well, no.
So I pressed the close button and the elevator stopped again on the 6th floor.
There for a long time.
And there's no one there either. When the elevator stopped on the 7th floor, I suddenly got angry. "Hey, stop!" I stuck my head out the door and shouted. But I didn't feel any human presence upstairs. A sudden shudder passed over me, but still I thought it was someone's prank. The elevator then stopped again on the 8th floor while going up, but this time there was a little girl standing in front of the door.
Run.
She seemed like she was about 6 or 7 years old.
Runaway.
But you know
She's
what was a
definitely-
strange thing about her?
definitely some
Despite the late
creepy
hours, there was no one around her.
thing. She-
Like
she
parents.
looks
You know, someone
pale.
like that.
Run.
But this kid just stood there still without getting on.
Just get
Hey
your
kid,
shoe and
are you
smack
gonna
her
get
with
in?
it.
I asked. But she didn't answer. As soon as I felt chill somewhere, I soon pressed the close button of the elevator. Just as the door was closing halfway through, she pressed the open button again. The short kid standing on tiptoes opened the elevator door, so I told her again to get inside. However, she still stood there without answering. Just at that time, I thought this was the one who's been playing pranks on me. So I pointed my finger at the CCTV and yelled at her not to prank anymore. Then the girl staring at me slowly opened her mouth. "I'll get in when my mom comes," she answered in a small voice. But I couldn't
When
see
her
any
mom
shadow of
comes,
people no matter how
kinda
much I
sounds
looked
sus to
around.
me.
But somehow her voice seemed really dark and creepy. It wasn't a childlike voice at all. I pressed the close button again roughly, and fortunately the kid didn't press the open button this time. The elevator started going up again and didn't stop on the next floor. With a sigh of relief, I just wanted to get off and get home as soon as possible. It was at that very moment. I was on the 11th floor and the light suddenly started blinking.
It's the girl.
I was staring at the light with
It's
a
the
nervous
girl.
mind, and something was strange with it. There was some spot on the light that was stained, as if someone had dropped black ink. And to my surprise,
Trust
it
me,
was
that's
getting
not
bigger
black paint.
and bigger every time the light went on and off.
That ain't black pink.
It
that
can't
that
be.
ain't
I'm imagining
ain't-
because I drank too much.
black
I
paint.
kept repeating it inside, but the stains
Something
grew
else.
bigger and bigger as if it was teasing me. Although I was sweating on my back, it was still chilly inside the elevator. And the moment I looked at the light and then looked straight front this time, I couldn't help but doubt my eyes.
She's there.
There, I could see a person's hand reflected on my back.
Yep.
Seriously? I was the only one in this elevator. After having confidence that there's an unknown thing that exists here, I was seized with extreme fear. The time to go up to the 16th floor was like an eternity. I couldn't hold my fear back. I eventually pressed the button to get off the 14th floor. I was about to pop out as soon as the door opened, but I had to stop suddenly. The girl I saw on the 8th floor was standing there, like she was waiting for me. I felt like my heart was sinking. Shivering, just as I was about to get off, she raised her head slowly. At that moment, I saw it. Unlike before, she was smiling brightly, as if her mouth was going to be ripped soon. "My mom is here now. I'm going to get in." Mom? What's she talking about? I'm sure the elevator was empty from the basement floor. Besides, not even a small rat was to be seen, let alone a human while I was inside. Then, who is it? I was strained to the limit, and my legs were trembling. I almost pushed the child and ran out of the elevator to the emergency stairs. For some reason, I was afraid that I'd never see my wife again if I stayed here. I was going up the stairs frantically.
Probably gonna
Just
trip
then,
on oxygen.
the sensor at the emergency exit started turning on much faster than my speed. It's like someone was already going up.
Slowpoke.
I was about to go insane. When I finally
Not
reached the
only
16th floor,
things.
I flung the emergency door open and rushed out of. I turned. I tried to run toward my house, and then someone was standing in front of the house. The woman with incredibly long hair and the girl I saw at the elevator. They were there. How the heck did they know my house? I didn't know what was going on right now, but only one thing came to my mind
Did
for a
not play
moment.
Minecraft with
I must not go back home now. I barely managed to turn back and carefully twisted the emergency door again. And at that moment, my sweaty hand just slipped and the door clanked in the quiet hallway. The moment I looked into the hallway with a desire to cry, I suddenly heard a sound from the end of the hall. It was the sound of a woman's shoes and baby shoes. I pushed the emergency exit door. While I ran frantically downstairs, I could hear the shoe sounds behind me at regular intervals. Almost rolling over myself, I went down through the front door and then rushed into the lighted security office. However, the security guard was just patrolling his round at that time, so he was not there. I lifted my trembling body and looked at the front door through the small window in the front.
And then they're gonna be there.
And at that moment, I felt my legs weaken.
Yep.
A woman and a child didn't come out of the front door, but they were glaring at me fiercely, as if they were going to kill me. I was about to scream, but just then, the guard came into the office. He got surprised to see me trembling and asked me what was going on.
No, do this to me. I can't do this today. No.
I tried to explain by pointing my hand at the front door, but then I realized that there was no one. Eventually, the security guard came to my house with me. To my surprise, my wife, who thought she was asleep already, was waiting for me with the lights on. And what my wife told me was a surprise itself. She said that someone rang our doorbell when I was seeing the woman and kid in front of my house. My wife thought it was me out there, so she walked to the front door to open it. But then she felt something wasn't right, because whenever I came home late at night after dinner, I always acted more carefully instead of ringing the bell. So my wife turned on the intercom and looked out. But there was no one. And when she returned to her seat, the bell rang again, and the same situation repeated on and on. So this time she was looking closely at the screen when the moment the bell rang without putting down the phone, and there was the face of the woman who filled the screen to the full. At first, it's like someone was sticking her face on the screen intentionally, but when my wife looked closely, her face looked so pale, as if it were dead already. She urgently turned on all the light right away and tried to call the administration office. However, the guard didn't answer because he was just on patrol at that time, and I was running downstairs like crazy. When my wife saw the intercom screen again, it was already gone. The next day's morning, I went to the security office to check the elevator CCTV, and I couldn't keep my mouth closed for a while in a panic. On CCTV, I could see that I was waiting for the elevator on the first floor. I stepped inside. Nothing happened at first. However, I suddenly started to press the buttons from 5th to 8th floors as if I were possessed by something. There was literally no one on the 7th floor, but I screamed into the air, and when the door opened on the 8th floor, I murmured something and then pressed the door's button to open. I pointed at the CCTV and said something, and then finally pressed the close button. Furthermore, I was gazing on the elevator lights for a while. Then I suddenly pressed the button on the 14th floor and ran out. So that means I was doing something really weird by myself. The CCTV on the front door also captured only me. No one came out. The guard laughed at me and my wife, saying that we saw imaginary things. But the feelings I felt at that moment were so real. It was so vivid.
Because he was drunk.
Who the heck were that woman and the child?
Oh wait.
Still,
I don't know about
I have no idea.
the woman though. You roll down your window. Nah, I'm good. Alright.
This happened a little over a decade ago when I was an undergrad. I worked as a pharmacy technician my sophomore through senior years. At a pharmacy, of course, you have regulars. One regular was Joe, a mid-30s man with long straggly hair and an affinity for bizarre outfits. He was very sweet, but also very ill, mentally and physically. He was on a cocktail of antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, antidepression, etc. Also, he was on medicine for AIDS. Normally Joe would come in with his mother, who took care of him. However, his mother was older and had her own health problems. Towards the end of my junior year, Joe started coming in by himself, so he would walk from his home or take a taxi. Joe told me frequently that I looked like a young Michelle Pfeiffer, that I should be in LA, yada yada. Aside from the curly blonde hair, I never really saw the resemblance, but okay. I was polite, told him thanks, and asked him how his mother was. Made general small talk while I rang up his scripts. He never gave me the beware vibe. My senior year, Joe's mother came in without him and told us that Joe wasn't doing well. He was refusing to take his antipsychotics, and she was getting too old to defend herself if Joe went into a rage. She was having him placed in a home for patients like Joe. I didn't know until that day that Joe was technically under guardianship. The courts and his doctors deemed him too ill to make important financial and medical decisions. Joe's mother gave us the medical release so that Joe's new home could send their staff to pick up his medicine. We didn't see Joe for about 4 months. It was the end of my senior year, a Friday night. Just me and the pharmacist were working because Friday nights are slow. I was reading a magazine when I heard,
"Hey, Michelle."
I'm not Michelle, so I didn't look up. Then angry,
"Michelle!"
and a slap on the counter in front of me made me look up. It was Joe. He was bleeding profusely and left a bloody handprint on the counter. I was shocked, and all I could do was slowly back away to put distance between myself and the very bloody Joe. The pharmacist came rushing over to ask Joe what he was doing here. His home had picked up his meds on Tuesday.
"I wanted to see Michelle. I miss her."
Then he started opening the waist-high door to get behind the pharmacy counter. The pharmacist called the store manager and told the manager to call 911 while she called Joe's mother.
"Michelle, come here. Give me a hug."
No, I don't think that would be appropriate, Joe.
"Give me a hug."
Then he just started screaming this over and over and attempting to climb over the counter. The pharmacist told me to go into the back storage room and lock the door. This just pissed Joe off. He started picking up items, which covered them in blood, and threw them at us. It was a chaotic mess. A patron was about to attempt to subdue Joe, but both the pharmacist and I both shouted not to touch him, due to him being covered in blood and positive for HIV. We told the small crowd that had formed to leave for their safety as Joe was flinging items and getting blood everywhere. Eventually, the police and EMTs arrived. The store manager must have explained the blood and HIV issue because they had on protective gear, long gloves, face masks, etc., and were able to forcibly sedate Joe. The store had to be shut down, and a special cleaning crew had to come in and clean the entire store. Joe's mother came to apologize after the store reopened. She explained that Joe had developed an obsession for me and grew angrier and angrier each month when he was not allowed to tag along to pick up his meds. He attacked one of their home residents the night of the incident, so the home grounded him and sent him to his room. Joe broke his window and crawled out through the broken glass and walked to the pharmacy. The home did not know he had broken out until his mother called frantically. His mother was considering suing the home for negligence, and she had moved Joe to a more secure mental health facility.
So you're like not freaked out or anything? You're just like, haha. You're just like, haha. Oh. Still 5 more minutes.
The man I saw at my apartment. It was around the time that our area was plagued by lots of sexual assault cases. And there was advice for us, which used to be that if someone followed you, look straight at his eyes and talk. Then one day, I was coming back home after hanging out with my friend.
That's the dumbest advice.
I saw a middle-aged man walking behind me, and suddenly I felt like he was following me. and he literally came to my apartment elevator. So I turned around intentionally and greeted him, smiling. "Hello." He pretended not to hear me at first, so I spoke to him, making eye contact with him more and more.
No, don't do it.
"I think I've never seen you in this apartment before. Did you move here?" He, this time, looked at me with his eyes wide open and then ran away from the spot, and I rushed towards the security office to report what I had experienced just before. And the moment when I saw the CCTV there, I had no choice but to just freeze in there. I was talking to myself, staring into the air. 2. The note in the trash can. It was during class time. I was exchanging a little note with one of my friends, writing just a boring story, you know. And after class, I tore up the paper and threw it into the trash can. On my way home after school, I realized that I had left some of my stuff in my locker, so I headed back to the classroom. But I felt something strange when I arrived in front of the class. So before I opened the front door, I slowly looked at people through the window next to the door, and when I looked inside, there was another of my classmates there. And he was picking up my torn note that I had exchanged with my friend in the trash, assorting it as if it were like a puzzle, and reading it. 3. How do you know? One day I ran into my neighbor in the elevator. "Hey, I recently got to know a lot of good songs these days, thanks to you. By the way, do you want to hear my ringtone?" He said like this and turned on his ringtone, which was one that I used to listen to at home by myself these days. For your information, I've never heard it loud enough to be heard in the hallway, and I was positive that I haven't let him know the name of the song either. "Did I?" When I asked, he replied, "Yeah, sometimes I put my ears to your front door and I could hear everything." It turns out that he was a man who didn't mind eavesdropping at random people's doors. As soon as I heard it, I got sudden goosebumps and didn't want to live here anymore. I feel like I'm going to move to another place as soon as my house contract is over. 4. The taxi driver. When I was in high school, I would always go to school early at 5 a.m.,
Creepy ass.
around during the exam period. My school was a little far away from where I lived, so I used to take a taxi with my friend at that time. However, I came out too early that day, so I had to ride alone. So I was on my way to the school. Then I realized that the driver was wearing sunglasses even though it was dawn, and I felt like he kept glancing at me through the side mirror. "How old are you?" I answered his sudden question.
Don't answer him.
18. He
I'd be
kept
like, "How
driving
old are
without
you?"
saying anything, and he suddenly stopped where the car had to turn left.
Oh shit.
Then he called me. "Get off." "Excuse me?" Totally freaking out, I asked him, and he calmly replied, "I said get off. You couldn't have gotten off if you weren't the same age as my daughter, you know?" The moment I heard his words, I got goosebumps from head to toe. I ended up getting off the car without looking back and ran away to school. 5. The talisman. There was a pretty famous fortune teller in our town that everyone knew. And this year they started to make talismans for free for those who are weak or in bad situations. I didn't think of it that much at first. Since it was just a talisman, there was a rumor about its effectiveness, but it wasn't sufficiently proven. Then one day, my mom's friend made a talisman from there for her son who became a middle school student, and he eventually carried it in his wallet. But one of his friends took the talisman from his wallet and played a prank on it. He rubbed the talisman on the stone and it got crumpled all over the place. And the incident happened the next day. While her son was riding his bike to school, he was hit by a dump truck in front of the main gate, which ended up becoming a paraplegic. I got goosebumps, and afterward, I repeatedly asked my mom not to even think about getting anything like a talisman from the fortune tellers for a while.
Oh, is that it? Oh, alright, one more, just this one.
1. The man with a fret saw. The house I used to live in was a kind of detached house form. Although the house was an open place, it would not be possible to break in even if someone climbed over the wall if the door was locked.
Mosquito dust.
However, the incident just happened one summer. Being tired of the hot weather, I just put a chain on the door and went to sleep without even thinking of an uninvited guest's invasion. Not long after, a weird sound began to be heard from somewhere at night. At the moment I opened my eyes to the sound, I saw a man cutting our door chain with a small fret saw in front of the door.
Oh, no, and you've got long nails.
I, who was terrified at that time, screamed loudly, but he didn't stop sawing. Surprised by my scream, my parents and older brother ran outside, and my brother, who was grabbing a golf club in one hand, yelled to the man, "What are you, man? Do you have a death with?" Then the man smiled and said, "If this gets cut, you guys all die." Fortunately, the man was arrested by the cops, who arrived quickly, and we didn't suffer big damage, though. But the memory of the day still scares me up to this day. 2. My dear, were you scared? I once had a big sleep paralysis while I was sleeping. Fortunately, I was able to wake up soon after, and I rushed to my mom's room with fear, and she hugged me. "My dear, were you scared?" Mom said to me like this as she patted my back, and I seemed to be relieved by her voice at first. However, I suddenly felt something was wrong. My mom began to ask the same question over and over again, scratching me on the back with her fingernails slowly but continuously. "My dear, were you scared? Were you scared? Were you scared?" 3. My missing friend. Today I went to my friend's funeral. It was really heartbreaking, maybe because he died absurdly with a month left before his marriage. So he was living alone in a studio apartment. He told me and other friends that he will travel to Europe by himself for a while before his wedding. When he said he wouldn't be able to contact us for a month, we all thought he was enjoying his travel. However, I felt something strange that he didn't come back after the day he had mentioned. We all felt anxious, so another friend ended up visiting his house, and he was found dead in the bathroom.
Oh.
It turns out that while he went in the bathroom alone, his big mountain bike fell on the floor and it didn't open, and my friend was locked up for a month and dead like that. Even now, my tears still flow with the sadness lingered in my heart. I hope you guys, whoever read this, always be careful. 4.
Imagine
The woman
dying
in the
in a
restroom. Our school went on a trip to China for a vacation. We were supposed to go to one hotel as our lodging, but due to traffic problems, the reservation was canceled, having communication problems with the hotel. All the teachers were freaked out, and we had to gather at a nearby McDonald's waiting for about 2 hours. Meanwhile, our teachers were looking around for the other hotels, and there were available rooms in an old mansion-style hotel run by a Korean. Anyway, we were able to explain quickly since the owner was Korean and ended up staying for about a day. We unpacked our stuff, washed up, and fell asleep. But one of my friends kept waking me up that night. "Hey, can you go to the restroom with me?" However, since the hotel, which was different in structure from a regular hotel, it was difficult to find a restroom, and I was afraid to walk around this night, so I refused and just continued sleeping. The next morning, while we were checking out, she was constantly asking a question at the counter, and her face was turned deadly pale, so I asked her what she was asking about. "Friend, I went to the restroom alone yesterday, you know. It was too dark and scary, but I really had to pee. So I ended up finding the restroom and was sitting inside, and then I heard a Chinese woman said something outside. So I was thinking, oh, the other guest is going to use the restroom too. But then she only repeated one word, Zai Ming, like this. My poor friend got scared and thought for a long time whether to go out or not. Finally, when she ran out at once and there was no one there, she returned to the room in fear. After she calmed down a little, she then started to search for the word that she heard just before through the internet. But the results did not come out, so she had no choice but to sleep again. Eventually, she knew the word's meaning that she had heard in the restroom only after she went to the computer the next day and asked. What she said was, "On top of you." The sound from the upstairs. After she went to the computer the next day and asked. What she said was, "On top of you." The sound from the upstairs. My aunt once moved out to the apartment. However, the location was rural, and the apartment was constructed around there, so it was totally empty at that time any residents were coming in. Anyway, after my aunt and uncle had moved in, they began to hear footsteps from upstairs every day at dawn that seemed to be someone was walking around. It's not like just a few times. They heard it for the whole month. My aunt gradually started to get mad, so she ended up visiting upstairs, but there was no one in the apartment. Then she visited the security guard and asked, "Excuse me, is there a person living in that apartment?" "Well, it's probably an empty apartment yet." My mom told her that the thief, the beggar, or the stray cat might have come inside. So the next day, my aunt visited the guard again and told him about this. And he eventually went upstairs that night and searched the whole inside, but there was no sign of forced entry to the apartment. Nevertheless, the running sounds from upstairs didn't seem to stop and bothered my aunt and uncle. And my aunt, who felt something strange, ended up calling a shaman. When the shaman arrived at the apartment, she took a look around inside and calmly told her like this, "You must leave here. Move out to another place." "What are you talking about?" Being dumbfounded, she asked back as soon as she heard it. However, after hearing the shaman's next words, she changed her mind, and they eventually ended up leaving the apartment. So this is what the shaman actually said. "This is the sound of ghosts wandering around. But the problem is, it's not from the upstairs. This sound is from your ceiling, and it's walking around, hanging upside down." The amusement park. One day, one of the employees was preparing to close the ride in the amusement park. Then he saw two people coming in. "I guess you guys are the last." The staff led them to their seats, and the two, who appeared to be a couple, sat in a friendly atmosphere and said, "Oh, we are celebrating our 100th day anniversary." "Congratulations! What kind of anniversary is it? Date?" Operating the ride, he also said pleasingly, and at that moment when he turned around, the woman said to him, "No, the anniversary of our death." He immediately got goosebumps and blankly looked back at the place where the ride left. What kind of prank is that? However, to his surprise, there was no one on the ride when it came back. And when he checked the CCTV again, he only saw himself staring into the air, greeting and talking to himself, and operating the ride.
Ah, man, I wanted to see more. It's only 9 more minutes.
Hi, I'm Jade, and a little thing I love about Chick-fil-A's new Grilled Spicy Deluxe is the way that the Colby Jack cheese complements the spicy...
About 10 years ago, my family had a studio rental business in a big city. Our studio had the most thorough security system at that time. So, as a result, our studio became the best place for those parents who ever wanted to send their daughter from the rural area to the city. Even though the rent price was highly expensive, our studio was always traded, and because of that, the gender ratio of women was far higher. At that time, there was a woman who had moved into our studio for about 3 months. She was the kind of annoying type that she requested changing the automatic door lock's password several times a month. There was a manual in the room that helps you to change the password for oneself, but she kept asking us to do it every time, saying that it was complicated. We felt like she was the type who was going to fuss about our studio someday, so we always did her favor whenever she asked. But one day, she started saying something strange. She said that someone seemed to be coming inside of her room when she wasn't there. Of course, we have a master card to enter every room, but I swear, we are not those ignorant types of owners who come in and go out of any room, except for sometimes when people who leave their rooms without telling us they had changed the password, or when we had to do an electrical inspection for the empty rooms, asking for prior consent already. But she seemed to doubt me, because I was the one who guarded the studio during my university vacation. Anyway, my parents sent her back to her room kindly, saying that she might be mistaken at first. Then the other day, she came up angrily this time. She said that she put a piece of paper in the crack of the door and folded the edge of the bed's blanket slightly when she went out. However, when she came back again, then she found that the paper was fallen on the ground and the blanket was all spread out. Cursing me tremendously, she had already believed 100% that I was certainly the criminal. At the time, I was ordering food and in a good mood after cleaning the roof in a heavy sweat, and this woman's behavior slowly pissed me off. And even my parents seemed to be suspicious of me at this point. But I couldn't confirm what was happening on each floor because there was only one CCTV in the front door and another one in the parking lot at that time. No matter how I felt the unfairness, I couldn't just install all the CCTV using a huge sum of money to capture the evidence of the woman who has such a megalomania and mythomania. So I put a digital camera that had very low resolution at that time in a beverage box and put it in a hallway where she was living. I had to go down every 2 hours and empty the memory, and I finally ended up thinking that I wouldn't be able to do this anymore after about 3 days. On the 4th day, the incident happened. That day, the police knocked on our door first. Following them, when I looked inside the woman's room, I could see the pearl-like eyeshadow was spread on every side of the walls. It turned out that the woman had coated the doorknob with cosmetics when she went down to her hometown for a few days, hoping the criminal to leave a trace when he broke into her room. But as if he were mocking her, the criminal had put those pearl shadows all over the walls, ceilings, and even floors of the room. So the police came to my room after receiving the woman's report. They started to investigate whether they could find any traces of pearl shadow on my keyboard, mouse, drawer handle, faucet, and even the toilet watering lever. But it was nonsense. I was just eating delivery food without knowing anything. The wash basin in the woman's room, which had been empty for 4 days, was completely wet, as if someone had just finished taking a shower, and I could see the soap was expanded. I was eventually called to the police station as a witness for questioning. When I finally got back home, I brought my camera that I had installed before to see what was on it, just in case. And then, something strange was caught in the camera. On the second night, around 11 p.m., the woman's boyfriend was filmed entering that empty...
Can you hear me now?
No.
With Canvas talking presentations, I record myself once, and anyone can watch it.
So scary, bro.
He wasn't in the video for the 3rd day, and of course I couldn't film it for the 4th day. It was a suspicious thing. In the end, I went to the police station again with my camera and submitted it. The whole story of the incident that was revealed later was like this. It was her boyfriend who made her terrorized and tremble in an attempt to bring her into his studio. While she went to college, he kept sneaking into her room and left those suspicious traces for a month. Then as his girlfriend noticed the strangeness, she told him what had happened, and he kept telling her about the cruel and scary murdering cases that occurred in a studio apartment.
Shut up!
Later, he suggested to her that she could sleep in his house if she was scared. His final goal was cohabitating with the woman, and the climax happened on that day. After hearing that she had set up a trap at the door, he entered her room and rubbed the pearl shadows on the whole room more than she did. Of course, the sink, the blanket, and the paper between the doors, everything was all by him. He thought that if his girlfriend felt extreme fear, she would end up living with him. What was even more creepy was that when the police came to our studio that day, he was comforting his girlfriend calmly, hugging her in his arms. The more she got afraid, the more courteously that bastard consoled her, and kept thinking about how he could make her scared on the other hand. In the end, the man was accused by the woman and her family, and the woman took time off from school due to the huge shock.
finally gonna click off.
There's something I want to confess about, so I'm going to write it down on this anonymous site. I'd like to talk about one thing I really did wrong. When I was in elementary school, I had to ride my bike to school because there was some distance from my house to my school. My house was located in a back alley. And one day on my way home, I was riding my bike around the curve, and I couldn't slow down, so I ran over an old lady. She collapsed, passing out,
I couldn't see
and I rushed
anything,
back
so
to
I
my
just
house
ran
being
over a
terrified.
old lady.
She was a very kind person in my town. She was close
She's
to my
very
family
kind, so I
and people
ran
in the
over her.
neighborhood, so she always greeted me kindly whenever she saw me. Back then, the CCTVs weren't installed around on the streets, so no matter what happened in the alley, there was no way to find out who did it. And the next day, a handwritten poster was attached to the alley wall. "We're finding a witness. My grandmother had an accident. We don't want to believe it, but if the criminal is one of our neighbors, please confess. We don't want strong punishment either. We just want to resolve the injustice." It was written something like this. She returned home shortly after being treated for a concussion, and after that, her health began to deteriorate rapidly, because she was quite an old lady. I was afraid that I'd be revealed that I did it, but she didn't seem to remember the incident. Or was she just pretending that she couldn't remember? Anyway, she was always spending time in the same place, enjoying the wind or the sun, and I had to avoid that place where she was. I shouldn't say it like this, but fortunately, I wasn't caught. As time went by, my guilt gradually became dull, and I was living without much thought of it. When I was in high school, she had dementia. And one other day, I was passing by the alley, and I met the old lady again. I greeted her unconsciously. I'm not sure if she had a clear mind or not, but anyway, she smiled at me and said like this, "Oh, hello. So you don't ride your bike anymore?" The cold sweat soaked my back in a brief moment. Without answering, I just ran away, and time passed. The old lady passed away after I became an adult, and there's still the guilt in the corner of my heart. Since I can't tell this story to anyone, I hope you guys understand me.
So, I'm not gonna tell my neighbors. I'm gonna tell the whole world. Dude, you're just gonna get in more trouble.
Using the power of anonymity to write it here. I know, I'm just the most terrible trash in the world.
Yeah, you are the most terrible trash in the world.
The new pepperoni
And now
pizza
the
meatball
pepperoni
sub.
pizza meatball
Only at Firehouse Subs.
Well, that's gonna do it for today.